Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, that is. My channel is Discerning What is True. Today is the 18th day of April, 2024. Going to be reading part 2, that is, of the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Mysteries of AMENTA by Gerald Massey. I think what I did last night, I basically underestimated how long it would take to read this book, which is approximately, I think, about 160 pages long. Well, roughly, I got 43 pages, roughly. So I went through 1/4 of the book itself. So we'll start again where I left off last night, and we'll continue to read until we get down the road, so to speak. We'll see how long it goes. I think that was over an hour and 30 minutes or close to that last night. So thank you for being here. I hope that you enjoy this work by Gerald Massey. To my new audience, Gerald Massey was brought up in a very poor home, a very poor house, in fact. Basically, he didn't have any tutoring. He went to school for so many years. His family was so poor they couldn't afford to provide education for him. And what took place was simply is that I think the age of 9 or 10 years old, he went to work in a factory in order to help his family survive. He doesn't go into a lot of detail of what, why was his family poor, or whatever, such and such. But within a short period of time, he got frustrated, maybe a year or two, whatever, decided that this job he was working in, I think it was a textile plant, which were very dangerous machinery was being run. And many children would lose their arms or feet, not feet, but their hands, such and such, by putting their hand in the wrong position, wrong place in the machinery, not really understanding the risk that they were taking. So what happened simply is roughly a year or two, maybe a little longer, he decided to quit that job. And the job he went somewhere else was even worse than what he had before. And I don't understand, I just remember what was told simply is that he was getting paid very little, like shillings at that time. And his family was, again, like I said, very poor. I don't know if they even had property. I don't even know if they were in what I would call indentured servants or something of that nature. He doesn't go into a lot of detail. But the point simply is roughly a couple of years after that, roughly when he gets about 14 or 15 years old, he's offered somehow, some way, opportunity to go to London, and life changed for him. He got a chance to educate himself and began to move, and seemed as though everything was worked out. In other words, he got a chance to read and to work at the Museum of Egyptology in London, and was a key figure there. And basically in the late 1800s, he roughly, I think, died in 1904, 1903. Don't hold me to that. But anyway, this is what I remember. So anyway, he was a brilliant man, and he was able to read hieroglyphics, and he was also not a Rosicrucian, but was similar to Helen Blavatsky. And my mind just escapes again. I don't know why I have the problem with this word. But anyway, he was involved in that group. And he wrote some books. And these are some of the books. He wrote quite a few books, folks. Quite a few. And they're brilliant books, too. So now we take the shade, I'm going to begin now. So now we take the shade to image a soul of blood, the Baha, that is the Baha, to image a soul of light, and the Hati heart to represent a soul of breath. We can perceive a ransom de etre, for the offerings of blood, of lights, and of incense as sacrifice to the manes in three different phases or states. Blood was generally offered to the shades, as we see in survival among the Greeks and Romans. The shade was in the first stage of the past existence, and most needly in AMENTA, the blood which was the life on earth, and held to be of first necessity for the reviving of the dead as manes or shades. The Sephem was one of the souls or powers. It is difficult to identify this with a type and place in the seven. Protem, we call it fourth of the series, is more important to know what force it represents. The name is derived from the word clem, K-H-E-M, for potency. Clem is physics, signifies erectile power. The man of 30 years, as typical adult is clem. Sahem denotes having the power or potency of the erectile force. In the eschatological phase, it is the reproducing formula power of clem or amsu to re-erect, the power of erection being applied to the spirit and fashioning and visualizing the new and glorious body for the future resurrection from AMENTA. The clue is a soul in which the person has attained the status of the pure in spirit called the glorified, represented in the likeness of a beautiful white bird. The Ka, K-A, is a type of eternal duration in which the sevenfold personality is unified and lasts for permanent or everlasting life. So this is a whole perspective here as he speaks of it being 30 years old, is what we call the abilities to eventually move spiritually up in man's life. Me and Phil have talked about that in the past, and it usually is to do with what I would call roughly 40 years old, what we talked about. So this was spoken of in 30. But anyway, it is the clue that is thus addressed to the tomb as the glorified one. Quote, "Thou shalt not be imprisoned by those who are attached to the person of Osiris." Then in brackets, that is the mummy, in bracket, "and who have custody of souls and spirits, and who shut up the shades of the dead. It is heaven only that shall hold thee," end quote. Ritual chapter 92. The shade of itself could never leave the tomb. For this reason, it was commonly held that the shade remained with the corpse or mummy on the earth. But here the tomb, the mummy, and the shade are not on earth. They are in AMENTA. Without the Ba soul, the shade remains unvivified. Without the Sephem, it lacks the central form or power of re-arising. Without the clue spirit, the person does not ascend from the sepulchre or prison house of the nether world. But when this has been attained, the deceased is glorified. And if chapter 91 is known, quote, "He taketh the form of a fully equipped cloak," or in brackets, spirit, "in the nether world, and does not suffer imprisonment at any door in AMENTA, either in coming in or going out," end quote. Renowned, chapter 91. It is only when the manes, M-A-N-E-S, is invested as cloak, that he ascends to the Father as the Son of God, all in lowercase. So we gather from the following words addressed to Horus by the person who is now a cloak. Quote, "O mighty one, who seest thou, Father, and who has charge of the books of Tau, here am I. I come and am glorified and filled with soul and power, and am provided with the scriptures of Tau," end quote. His copy of the book of life, his light in the darkness of AMENTA, he now ascends to Ra, his father, who is in the bark, and exclaims again and again, quote, "I am a powerful cloak. Let thou soundness be my soundness," end quote. That's in chapter 105. When the deceased has been made perfect as cloak, he is free to enter the great house of 7 halls. Chapter 145. Likewise, the, quote, house of him who is upon the hill, end quote, and who is, quote, ruler in the divine hall, end quote. The greater house, I should say the great house, is the heaven of Osiris based upon the 36 gates, or duodecans, of the zodiac. The other is the house of Anup, A-N-U-P, at the summit of the Mount Anu. Quote, behold me, end quote. He exclaims, quote, behold me, I am come to you and have carried off and put together my forms, end quote, or constituted parts of the permanent soul, which were 7 altogether. These are 1, the Kabbalit, or dark shade, 2, the Ba, or light shade, 3, the breathing heart, 4, the Sephem, 5, the Sahu, 6, the Klub, and 7, the Ka. When the mains have become a Klub, the Ka is still a typical idea ahead of him, so far ahead or aloof that he perpetuates it with offerings. So this is like a move with up, and up, such and such, and he's at the 6th person. He's at the 6th position, and yet he needs to go to the 7th, which would be the Ka. In fact, he presents himself as the sacrificial victim that would die to attain conjunction with his Ka. His image of eternal duration, his type of totality, in which the 7 souls were permanently unified in one at last. See, Revelation mentions many things to do with the number 7 also. And the word revelation means revealing. The Ka has been called the double of the dead, as if it simply represented the doppelganger, but it is not merely a phantom of the living or personal image of the departed. It serves also for the apparition or revenant. It is a type rather than a portrait. It is a type that was prenatal. It images a soul which came into existence with the child, a soul which is food and substance to the body all through life, a soul of existence here and of duration for the life hereafter. Hence, it is absorbed at last in the perfected personality. It is defeated in the temple of Luxor, where the birth of Amenhotep III is portrayed as coming from the hand of God. The Ka of the royal infant is shown in the pictures being formed by Klumum, the molder on the potter's wheel. It is in attendance on the person all life through as the genius of guardian angel, and the fulfillment of the personality is effected by a final reunion with the Ka. As already shown, when divine honors were paid to the Pharaoh, the offerings were made to his Ka, not to his mortal self. Thus the mains in AMENTA makes an offering of incense to purify himself in propitiation of his Ka. This is based in what we call in chapter 105. There is a chapter of, quote, providing food for the Ka, end quote. Also, the mortuary meal was eaten in the chamber of the Ka, the resurrection chamber of the sepulchre. Food was offered to the Ka, it did not done, as the representative of the departed instead of directly to the spirits of the ancestors. It was set up there as receiver/general of the offerings. Also, the food was presented to it as a type of the divine food which sustained the human soul. Thus, when the divine substance is offered by the god or goddess to the soul of the mortal on the earth or to the mains in AMENTA, it is presented by the giver to the Ka. Certain priests were appointed to be ministers to the Ka, and these made the offerings to the Ka of the deceased on behalf of the living relatives. This is because the Ka was the type of personality 7 of the 7 souls attained as the highest in which the others were to be included and absorbed. In the Vignettas, that is to chapter 35 of the ritual, that is from Naville, Naville, Tot, T-O-D-T, Tap, K-A-P, comma, 25, volume 1, page 36. The deceased is shown his Ka, which is with him in the passages of AMENTA, not left behind in the tomb, that he may not forget himself. And then in brackets, as we might say, in brackets, or as he says, that he may not suffer loss of identity by forgetting his name. Showing the Ka to him enables the remains to recall his name in the great house and especially in the crucible of the house of flame. When the deceased is far advanced on his journey through AMENTA, his Ka is still accompanying him, and it is described as being the food of his life in spirit world, even as it has been his spiritual food in the human life. Quote, "Thou art come, Osiris, thy Ka is with thee. Thy feedest thyself under the name, should I say, thy name of Ka," end quote. When the Osiris had passed from the state of a shade to the stage of the Ka, he will become what the ritual designer designates, such as say, a fully equipped Mames who has completed his investitude. As a Sahu, he was reincorporated in a spiritual body. As a Klu, he was invested with a robe of glory. As a sacred hawk with the head of Benu, he was endowed with the soul of Horus in chapter 78. It was here he exclaimed, quote, "Behold me, I am come to you." Then in brackets it states, "the gods and the glorified," in bracket, "and have carried off my forms and united them," end quote. But in chapter 92, he was anxiously looking forward to the day of reckoning when he said, quote, "Let the way be open to my soul and my shade, that I may see the great God within his sanctuary on the day of the soul's reckoning," end quote. Next quote, "When all hearts and words are weighed," end quote. So again, we go back to the Book of the Dead, and the whole idea simply is that your heart is weighed and it must be light as a feather. If it's not, you will reincarnate again, based upon the Egyptian perspective here. Everyone who lives on this planet goes through this whole event. Now, it may not go the way they talk about it, but it's an illustration, simply is, of what takes place when they are judged. He is not yet one of the spirits made perfect, being neither judged nor justified. He has to pass his last examination and is now approaching the great hall of judgment for his trial. He says, quote, "I am come that I may secure my suit in Abydos," the mythical birthplace of Osiris. This is the final trial of the long series through which he has hitherto successfully passed in Ritual Chapter 2 in Renown. He has now arrived at the Judgment Hall. It has been asserted that the deeds which the deceased has done here on earth is no wise influence the fate that awaited the man after death. It's based upon Maspero, M-A-S-P-E-R-O, from the Egyptian archaeology, from E-N-G-T-R-A, sorry, take that back, E-N-G, I assume is Egyptian or either English, and it has T-R, and it says page 149. So this is a quote from this particular journal, I'm assuming. But how so when the new heart, which was given to the deceased in AMENTA, where he or she was reconstituted? And see, let's think about that word, reconstituted. Our whole perspective, some of the old name is your constitution, which is your soul. That's just an old word. I'm wanting to keep my constitution whole. Okay, well, that reveals your soul is what I understand here. So reconstituted is remade in some way is what I'm thinking here, okay? is said to be fashioned in accordance with what he has done in his human life. And the speaker pleads that his new heart may not be fashioned according to all the evil things that may be said against him, based upon Ritual chapter 27. He is anxious that the ministrants of Osiris in the nether car, that is, quote, who deal with a man according to the course of his life, end quote, may not give a bad odor to his name, chapter 3:0b. And again, he pleads, quote, let me be glorified through my attributes. Let me be estimated according to my merits, end quote. And that's based upon chapter 72. It is plainly apparent that the future fate of the soul was dependent on the deeds that were done in the body. And the character of the deceased was accredited according to his conduct in the life on earth. The jury sitting in the judgment hall consisted of 42 masters of truth. Their duty was to discover the truth with fierce interrogation and the instinct of slew/hounds on their track. Was this Maines a true man? Had he lived a true life? Was he true at heart when this was tested in the scales? So this is the whole perspective, the scales again being weighed. His viscera were present for inspection and then keen scrutinizers, I should say, in their animal headed forms were very terrible, not only in vicious, for they had a vested interest in securing a verdict of guilty against the Maines, inasmuch as the viscera of the condemned were flung to them as perquisitive and prey. Therefore, they searched with the zeal of hunger for the evidence of evil living that might be found written on the record of the entered man. Piecemeal, the Maines were examined to be passed if true, to be sent back if not. And sent back means, again, you will reincarnate. And it's what I understand, me and Phil, we talked about some things, Phil Langdon that is, you really don't have a choice to be sent back. You do. There are those, and we'll go into this sometime, but basically you got to come back. Okay. And me and Philip talked about it. I'll go into it right now. Those who refuse and don't go along with this, they are put in a spot of what we call poltergeists or ghosts. Because they refuse to go back. They refuse to reincarnate. And so they'll be in that state for whatever deal until they come to the realization that basically they're not getting anywhere. At first, sometimes, as we and Phil talked, they enjoy, quote unquote, frightening people, you see. So this is where we get the idea of ghosts or poltergeists or whatever you want to call it. They're used towards other people who have done nothing wrong whatsoever to use fear upon them in a way. So they are real, but they've chose to not come back. And this is how the judgment dealt with. Okay, then you will not be in the physical body. You see. So they do have a choice per se, but none of it really counts for anything until they come to the recognition that they're just wasting their time and floundering around and doing nothing. They're not moving forward, what we call spiritually. And I won't go any more than that. It's pretty much the summation of what we talked about. In the shape of swines or goats or other typhonic animals, and driven down into the fiery lake of outer darkness where Baba, the devourer of hearts, the Egyptian, quote, raw head and bloody bones, end quote, was lying in wait for them. The highest verdict rendered by the great judge in the most awful judgment hall was a testimony to the truth and purity of character established for the Maines on evidence that was unimpeachable. At this post-mortem, the sins done in the body through violating the law of nature were proved for most profoundly. Not only was the deceased peasant in spirit to be judged at the dread tribunal, the book of the body was opened and its record read. So we have that same type of thing even in Scripture. You see, it talks about that. Not in as much detail as this is being done. The vital organs such as the heart, liver, and lungs were brought into judgment as witness to the life lived on earth. Any part too vitiate for the rottenness to be cut off or scrapped away was condemned and flung as offense to the powers who are called the eaters of filth, the devourers of hearts and drinkers of the blood of the wicked. And if the heart, for example, should be condemned to be devoured because very bad, the individual could not be reconstructed for a future life. In order that the Osiris may pass the great exercise as one of the justified, he must have made the word of Osiris truth on earth against his enemies. He must have lived a righteous life and been just, truthful, merciful, charitable, humane, in coming to the hall of judgment or justice to look on the divine countenance and be cleansed from all the sins he may have committed, he says. Quote, I have come to thee, O my Lord, I know thee. Lord of righteousness is thy name. I bring to thee right. I have put a stop to wrong, end quote. His plea is that he has done his best to fulfill the character of Horus Makhura. Some of his pleas are very touching. Quote, he has not exacted from the laborers as the first fruits of his each day. More work than was justly due to him. He has not snatched the milk from the mouths of babes and sucklings. He has not been a land grabber. He has not dammed the running water. He has caused no famine, no weeping, no suffering to men, and has not been a robber of food. He has not tampered with the tongue of the balance, nor been fraudulent, mean, or sordid of soul. There is a goodly list of pre-Christian virtues beside all of the theoretical Christian ones. Among us, others, he says, quote, I have perpetuated the God with that which he loveth, end quote. This was especially by the offering of Mat, M-A-A-T, viz. Justice, truth, and righteousness. Quote, I have given bread to the hungry, water to the thirsty, clothes to the naked, and a boat to the shipwrecked, end quote. Chapter 125. Yet, we have been told that charity and mercy were totally unknown to the pagans' world. He asked the 42 assessors for the great judge not to go against him, where he did the right thing in Tamar, the land of Egypt. His heart is weighed in the scales of justice. He passes peer as one of those who are welcomed by Horus for his own faithful followers, the blessed of his father, to whom it is said, quote, come in peace, end quote. Horus, the intercessor, advocate, or paraclete, now takes him by the hand and leads him to the presence of Osiris in the sanctuary. And I think I'll just say this, I'm going to speculate here, so I could be wrong. So I'm just going to say something here. We have this, the idea of the temple in Israel, and there's what we call, you only get so far into the temple, and then you get in certain areas, such and such, and then you get to the point what they call the Holy of Holies, which are basically, if I understand, I'm looking at this, again, I could be incorrect, is that is where you have made it. So it's a picture of what I would say to do with the temple, a revealing of something like what we call a judgment deal. And meaning you get all the way into the temple to the point. See, there were only so many who were allowed in a certain area in the temple of Solomon. And that's not as far as I know, it's not a literal interpretation. What I mean by that, there was no temple of Solomon, even though it's talked about all the time in the Bible. I don't see that as literal. I see that simply as it's sharing something in a way that's showing you what is going on in the city of Jerusalem, you see, so to speak. So you only get so far, and basically, you have to pay, give a sacrifice, such and such, and then basically they don't go into a lot of details, but basically you're being judged at that point and until you get to the Holy of the Holies, that's where I sense that is here, is come in peace. Horus, the intercessor, advocate, or paraclete, now takes him by the hand and leads him into the presence of Osiris in the sanctuary. We know this simply as some of these words that have been used in the Egyptians were passed on to the Old Testament in some ways to reveal what they were saying, but it was in a different way to the Jews. Again, I'm speculating. I could be wrong. It's just a speculation on my part. So don't hold anything to it. I'm just speaking from what I can examine. And even though I was brought up in a church and grew up in a church and went to seminary and then eventually left seminary, to the reality simply is that something was wrong. And then eventually to the point simply is now seeing certain things that were said, but they were not literal. Meaning there was no Temple of Solomon per se, or the Temple Tabernacle. Maybe I should say that. Maybe it's the Temple of Solomon. It's not a good word. Maybe I should say the Tabernacle, that is, where they come and offer a sacrifice. So, anyway, where am I? But when he kneels before Osiris on the throne, his hair is white. He has passed as one of the purified and is on his way to join the ranks of the just spirits made perfect, who are called the glorified. So again, we see this same analysis of Osiris in a way, kneels before Osiris on the throne. His hair is white. That's similar to what Revelation speaks of also, in speaking of God, you see. Now, again, that's my speculation too also. It could be wrong. So again, I don't want to deceive anybody here, but I also want to interject simply is to help people to understand that there are key things that go on in the Old Testament, or speaking of something deeper. Okay, the attendant said to him, quote, "We put an end to thy ills, and we remove that which is disorderly in thee through thy being smitten to the earth," end quote. In death, that is. These were the ills of mortality from which he has now been freed and spared. Here occurs the resurrection of the Osiris in the person of Horus, and is said, quote, "Ha, Osiris, quote, thou hast come, and thy Ka with thee, which united with thee in the name of Ka Hetep," end quote, chapter 128. An ordinary rendering of Ka Hetep would be, quote, "image of peace," end quote, type of attainment. But as the word Hetep or Hepti also means number 7, that coincides with the Ka, being an image of the septenary of souls, complete at last to be unified in the hawk-headed Horus. In the book or Papus role for involving the gods of the Kurti or boundaries, we find the speaker has now reached the limit of AMENTA. He says, quote, "I am the soul of Osiris and rest in him," end quote. Chapter 127. He is hailed as one who has attained his Ka and received his insignia of the resurrection. It is now said to the Osiris, quote, "Ha, Osiris, thou hast received the scepter, thy pedestal, and the flight of stairs beneath thee," end quote. This is from Ritual, again, chapter 128. Note, again, if you go back and look, even as I speculate again here, the flight of stairs, the stairs up to heaven, so to speak. The scepter was the hare, H-A-R-E, headed symbol of the resurrection first carried by Plot, the opener. The pedestal is the Papus of Horus, and the stairs denote the means of ascent from AMENTA to the summit of the Mount of Glory. He is now prepared and empowered to enter the bark of Ra, which voyages from east to west by day and from west to east by night. Before entering the bark, the Osiris has attained to every one of his stations in AMENTA, previously to sailing for the circumpolar paradise upon the stellar Mount of Glory. In chapter 130 is the book by which the soul is made to live forever on the day of entering the bark of Ra, which means that it contains the gnosis of the subject. It was made for the birthday or rebirthday of Osiris. Osiris is reborn in Horus as a type of an eternal soul. Hence, the speaker says in this character, quote, "I am coffin in an ark like Horus, to whom his cradle or nest of reeds is brought. End quote. He is reborn as Horus on his papyrus, as we say, an earlier figure on the water from the bark of Ra. He prays, quote, "Let not the Osiris be shipwrecked on the great voyage. Keep the steering tackle free from misadventure." End quote. When he entered AMENTA, the deceased in Osiris bore the likeness of the god, G-O-D, lowercase, in mummy form. Before he comes forth from the lower Eru garden, he can say, at the end of a certain transformation in type and personality, quote, "I am the soul of Osiris, and I rest in him," end quote, based upon chapter 127. This is in the character of a Horus. Quote, "I am Horus on the auspicious day," end quote, at the, quote, "beautiful coming forth from AMENTA," end quote. He has reached the boundary and now involves the god who is in his solar disk, otherwise in the bark of Ra. He died in Osiris to live again in Horus, son of God, or in his likeness. Chapter 141 and 142 begin the book of making the Osiris perfect. And this, as the ritual shows, was in the likeness of Horus, the beloved soul, and it's S-O-L-E, begotten son of Ra, the god in spirit. Now, when the mains had included his Ka in the name of Ka Hetep, ritual chapter 128, it is said to the deceased, that is in the pyramid text, Teta, T-E-T-A, 284, P-E-P-I 1-34, in brackets. Quote, "Horus hath brought to pass that his Ka, which is in thee, should unite with thee in the name of Ka Hetep," end quote, which shows the Ka within him was the image of Horus divinized. This corroborates the suggestion that the Ka type was derived from Ka, later Sa, S-A, the son of Atum Ra, who was earlier than Horus as the son of Osiris. Thus, the divine sonship of humanity, which was personified in Horus, or Ilu, or Sa, was also typified in the Ka image of a higher spiritual self, and when the mains had attained the status of a spirit perfected, it was in the form of a divine son who was the express image of the Father God. He was Horus the beloved in all reality, through perfecting the ideal type in his own personality. He now enters the divine presence of Osiris-Ra to relate what he has done in the characters of human Horus, or Har-Tema, and Har-Makuro, on behalf of his father, which constitutes him the veritable son of God. When the mains had attained the solar bark, he had put on, quote, the divine body of Ra, end quote, and is hailed by the Mestrons with cries of welcome and acclamations from the Mount of Glory, which is chapter 133. Excuse me a second here. In traveling through the underworld, he has passed from the western horizon of Earth to the east of heaven, where he joins the solar boat to voyage the celestial waters. There is a change of boat for the night. Hence, the speaker says he is, quote, coming in the two barks of the Lord of Sa, S-A-U, and based in chapter 136b in Renault. There may be some difficulty about the exact position of the chapter number 110 in the ritual, but there is no difficulty in identifying the fields of peace upon the summit of Mount Hetep at the lower paradise of two, which was the land of promise attainable in AMENTA. This was the subterranean or earthly paradise of the legends. When the mains come to these Elysius fields, he is still the earth of eternity, and has proved to himself a equal as a worker with the mighty Klux, or Klakuti, who are now 9 cubits high and cultivating his allotment of arable land. The arrival at Mount Hetep in this lower paradise or heaven of the solar mythos proceeds to entrance to the judgment hall, which is in the domain of Osiris below, and the voyage from east to west in the Meti and the Set-Tit bark of the sun. Therefore, it is not in the ultimate heaven or the upper paradise of eternity upon Mount Hetep. We see from the pyramid text in brackets here, Pepi, P-E-P-I 1, comma, lines 192, comma, 169, comma, 182, mass per row. Then he puts something here, looks like it's in Latin, les inscriptions, I'm sorry if I butchered this one, the Pyramids de Saqqara, end quote, not quote, but in brackets, that there were two stages of ascent to the upper paradise that were represented by two ladders. One is the ladder of Sut, S-U-T, as the ascent from the land of darkness. The other is the ladder of Horus, reaching to the land of light. King Pepi salutes the two. Quote, homage to thee, O ladder of Sut. Set thyself up, O ladder of God. Set thyself up, O ladder of Sut. Set thyself up, O ladder of Horus, whereby Osiris appeared in heaven when he wrought protection for Ra. Quote, Pepi likewise enters heaven in his name of the ladder. This is based upon Budge's works book, that is, the Book of the Dead, in the intro in pages 117 and 118. The mains also say in chapter 149, I raise my ladder up to the sky that I may behold the gods, end quote. But having traced the reconstruction of the deceased for a future life, we now return to follow him once more from the entrance to AMENTA on his journey through the underworld, his mortal personality having been made as permanent as possible in the mummy left on earth. The mains rising in AMENTA now sets out to attain the personality that is to last forever. He pleads with all his dumbness that his mouth may be open, or in other words, that his memory, which he has lost a while, may be given back to him so that he may utter the words of power. This is based upon chapters 21 to 23, with which he is equipped. The ceremony of opening the mouth after the silence of death was one of the profoundest secrets. The great type of power by means of which the mouth is open was the leg of the hippopotamus goddess, the symbol of her mightiness as primio mobilio, in the great bear having been adopted for this purpose in the eschatology. The ceremony was performed at the tomb as well as in AMENTA by the opener plot as a mystery of the resurrection. And among us, the many other survivals, this rite of, quote, opening the mouth, end quote, is still performed in Rome. It was announced in a daily paper not long ago, long since, in the Mail, that is apparently the newspaper, the Mail, August 8, 1903, that after the death of Pope Leo XIII and the coronation of Pius X, quote, a conciliatory would be held to close and open the lips of the cardinal newly created, end quote, or newly born into the purple. So see, you can see the colors have some identification here. And we, continue on. The Osiris also prays that when his mouth is open, Ta may come to him equipped with the words of power. So soon as the mouth of the mains is freed from the feathers of dumbness and darkness, or in brackets, or muzzles of Sut, and restored to him, he collects the words of power from all quarters more persistently than any sleuth hound and more swiftly than the flash of light, based upon chapter 23 and 24. These words of power are magical in their effect. They paralyze all opposition. They open every door. The power is at once applied. The speaker says, quote, back in retreat, back, crocodile Suda. Come not against me who live by the words of power, end quote. And that's based upon chapter 31. This is spoken to the crocodiles or dragons who come to rob the mains and carry off the words of power that protect the deceased and death. The magical mode of employing the words of power in the mysteries of Ta is by the deceased being assimilated to the character and assuming the superhuman type as a means of protection against the powers of evil. The speaker of the ritual does not mistake himself for the deity. He is the deity pro tem, enacted sign language, and by such means is master of the magical power. It is the God who is the power, and the magician employs the words and signs which express that power. But instead of praying to the God, lower G, he makes use of the divine words attributed to the God and personates the God as Horus or Ra, Ta or Osiris in character. He puts on the mask of a crocodile, an ibis, a lion, or other zoo type of the primary powers and says to his adversaries, quote, no, not quote, I am the crocodile. And then in brackets it says, it's a bet. Or I am the lion, which would be Atum. Or I am Ra, the sun, protected himself with the Uraeus serpent, and consequently no evil thing can overthrow me. Chapter 32. Repeating chapter 42 was a magical way of escaping from the slaughter which was wrought in Suten Klum, and the mode of magic was for the deceased in his rebirth to become or to be assimilated to the divine child in his rebirth. He tells the serpent, Abur, A-B-U-R, that he is the divine babe, the mighty one. Not a limb of him is without a God. He is not to be grasped by arms or seized by hands. Quote, not men or gods, the glorified ones or the damned, not generations past, present, or to come, can inflict any injury on him who cometh forth and proceedeth as the eternal child, the everlasting one. End quote. That's based upon Ritual, chapter 42. Or as Horus, the son of Isis. These divine characters are assumed by the manes when he commands his enemies to do his bidding. According to the magical prescriptions, I should say, in fighting the devil or the evil APAP, a figure of the monster was to be molded in wax with the name inscribed upon it in green. Again, this is from Budge Proceedings, Society of Architecture is what I'm guessing. So this is where the proceedings is, and this is from Budge's work. He's quoting that in 1866, and it's just like it says P.O. I don't know what that means. I would thought it would just simply P. Would recommend that it be page 21. So I'm assuming it's probably an error. But anyway, P.O. 21 in brackets. This was to be spat upon many times, spurned with the foot, and then flung into the fire as a magical mode of casting out the devil. When the apap reptile is first encountered and addressed in the ritual, is said, quote, oh, one of wax, who taketh captive and seizeth with violence and liveth upon those who are motionless. Let me not become motionless before thee. End quote. Ritual, chapter 7. This is because the presence of the devouring monster is made tangible by the image of wax, which represents the power addressed, that is otherwise invisible. The idea becomes concrete in the figure that it is thus magically employed. It is this magical sense that the opening chapters of the ritual are declared to contain, quote, the words of power, end quote, that bring about the resurrection and the glory of the manes and AMENTA. This mode of magic is likewise a mode of hypnosis or human magnetism, which was universally common with the primitive races, especially the African, but which is only now being timidly touched by modern science. The power of paralyzing and arresting emotion was looked upon as magical potency indeed. Hypnotic power is magical power. This is described as being taken from the serpent as the strength. In one passage in Ritual chapter 149, the serpent is described as he who paralyzes with his eyes, end quote. And previously in the same chapter, the speaker says to the serpent, quote, I am the man who covers thy head with darkness, and I am the great magician. Thy eyes have been given to me, and I am glorified through them. The strength or power is in my grasp, end quote. This might be termed a lesson in hypnosis. The speaker becomes a great magician by taking possession of the paralyzing power in the eyes of the serpent. The description seems to imply that there has been a contest betwixt the serpent charmer and the serpent, and that the man has conquered by wrestling the magical power from the reptile. The Manes had much to say about the adversary of souls whom he meets in AMENTA. This is the apap of darkness, or drought and dare, disease and death. It is the representative of evil in a physical phenomenon, which was translated as a figure from the mythology into a domain of eschatology. In chapter 32, the quote, Osiris standeth up upon his feet, end quote, to face and defy the crocodiles of darkness who devour the dead and carry off the words of power from the glorified in the underworld. They are stopped and turned back when the speaker says, quote, I am Atum. That's A-T-U-M. All things which exist are in my grasp, and those depend on me which are not yet in being. I have received increase of length and depth and fullness of breathing within the domain of my Father, the Great One. He had given me the beautiful AMENTA, through which the living pass from death to life, end quote, in chapter 32. Thus, the Osiris appears and speaks and acts in the characters of a drama previously extant in mythology. He comes forth as the bull of Osiris, based upon chapter 53a. As the god in lion form, Atum, A-T-U-M, in chapter 54, as the jackal Apollo of Sophis or Polaris, as the divine hawk, Horus in chapter 71 as the sacred hawk, in chapter 78 as the lotus of earth, chapter 81 as the Bennu bird or phoenix, that soul of Ra, in chapter 83 as the Shinshin or Hershal, in chapter 84 as the soul that is in the image of the eternal, chapter 85 as the dove or swallow, in chapter 86 as the crocodile Sabet, in chapter 88 as the Kluk or glorified spirit, in chapter 91, and many more. But the individual is shown to persist in a human form. He comes forth by day and is living after death in the figure, but not as the mummy that he wore on earth. He is portrayed staff in hand, prepared for his journey through the underworld. And this is from, in brackets, Naville, N-A-V-I-L-L-E, comma, T-O-D-T, comma, Cap, K-A-P, 2, Vignette, in bracket. Also, the image of man, the immortal, is portrayed in the likeness of man, the mortal. The human figure is never lost to view through all the plasma memorial of transformation. Again, this is from Naville, again, from the work T-O-D-T, Vignettes to Cop 2 and 186. From beginning to end of the ritual, we see it as being once human, man or woman, who is the traveler through the netherworld up to the Mount of Rebirth in heaven at the summit of the stellar paradise, where the efficacy of the earthly personality was ultimately merged into the divine image of the Ka. And the immortal puts on immortality in the likeness of the dear, D-E-A-R, old humanity, changed and glorified. This shows the ghost was founded on a human basis. That is, continued the human likeness in proof of his human origin. Resurrection in the ritual is the coming forth today, per re-embru, whether from the life on earth or to the life attainable in the heaven of eternity. The first resurrection is, as it were, a ascension from the tomb in the nether earth by means of the secret doorway. But this coming forth is in, not from, AMENTA after burial in the upper earth. The deceased has passed through the sepulchre, emerging in the lower earth. He issues from the valley of darkness and the shadow of death. Osiris has been cut to pieces in the lunar and other phenomena by the evil Set, and the limbs were gathered up and put together by his son and by the mother in AMENTA, where he rose again as Horus from the dead. And whatsoever has been postulated of Osiris the mummy in the mythology was repeated on behalf of Osiris in the eschatology. Osiris has originated as a god in matter when the powers were elementary, but in the later theology, the supreme soul in nature was configured in a human form. Matter as human was then considered higher than matter unhumanized, and the body as human mummy was superior to matter in external nature. Also, the spirit in human form was something beyond elementary spirit. Hence, the god as supreme spirit was based, as already shown, upon the human ghost, with matter as the mummy. Osiris as a mummy and AMENTA is what we might call the dead body of matter, invested with the limbs and features of the human form as the type to which the elementary power has attained into plot in Atum, and in the human feature Horus, which succeeded the earlier representation by means of zootypes. Osiris is a figure of inanimate nature, personalized as the mummy with a human form and face, while as being also an image of matter as the physical body of the god. The process applied to the human body first in death was afterwards applied to the god in matter, in the elements, or in the inert condition at the time of the winter solstice, awaiting corpse light for his transformation or transubstantiation into the young and glorious body of the sun, or spirit of vegetation in the spring. The solar god as the sun of evening or of autumn was the suffering, dying sun, or the dead sun, S-U-N, buried in the nether earth. To show this, it was made a mummy of, bound up in the linen vesture without a seam, and thus an image in a likeness of the dead who bore the mummy form on earth, the unknown being represented by the known. The sun god, S-U-N, when descending to AMENTA, may be said to mummify or kairos his own body in becoming earthed, or as it were, fleshed in the earth of Plot. Hence, the mummy type of Plot or Atum and Osiris, each of whom at different stages was the solar god in mummied form when buried in AMENTA. It has now to be shown how it was brought about that the final and supreme one god of the Egyptian religion was represented as a mummy in the earth of eternity, and why the mystery of the mummy is profoundest of all the mysteries of AMENTA. An essential element in Egyptian religion was human sympathy with the suffering god, or the power in nature which gave itself, whether as herself or himself, as a living sacrifice to bring the elements of life to men in light, in water, air, vegetation, fruit, roots, grain, and all things edible. Whence the type was eaten sacramentally as a sacrament at the Thanksgiving meal. This feeling was pathetically expressed at, quote, the festival of the staves, S-T-A-V-S, end quote, when crutches were offered as supports for the suffering autumn sun, otherwise the crippled deity Horus, dying down into AMENTA and pitifully needing help which the human sympathizers tried to give. Can anything be more pathetic than this address to the sufferers as the sun god in AMENTA? Quote, decree this, O Atum, that if I see thy face, that is in glory, I shall not be pained by the signs of thy suffering, end quote. Atum decrees, he also decrees that the god, little g, will look on the suppliant as his second self. This is based upon Ritual, chapter 173, and it says Naville, N-A-V-I-L-L-E, in brackets. The legend of the voluntary victim who is in passion of divinest pity becomes incarnate and was clothed in human form and features for the salvation of the world, did not originate in a belief that God had manifested once for all as a historical person. It has its roots in the remotest part. The same legend was repeated in many lands with a change of name and at times of sex of the sufferer, but none of the initiative in the esoteric wisdom ever looked upon the Kamite, Asul, I-U-S-A, or Gnostic Horus, Jesus, Tammuz, Krishna, Buddha, with Toba, or any other of the many saviors as historical in personality, for the simple reason that they had been more truly taught. Mythology was earlier than eschatology, and the human victim was preceded by the zootype. The phenomena first rendered mythically were not manifested in the human sphere. The natural genius was in another category altogether. The earliest Horus was not incorporated in a human form. He represented that soul of life which came by water to a dried up, withering world upon the verge of perishing with hunger and with thirst. Here, the fish, or the first fruit of the earth, was the sign of his incorporation in matter, hence the typical shoot, the green ear, or the branch that was imaged in child Horus. The savior who came by water was Ithithus, the fish. The savior who came in fruit as product of the tree was the Nazir, N-A-T-Z-E-R. The savior who came by spirit was the soul of the sun. This was the earliest renderings of the incorporation of Horus as the primary light and light of the world made manifest in external nature before the doctrine was applied to biology in the human domain, where Horus came by blood as the mode of incarnation in the human form. In the latter myth, Osiris is the deity who suffered as the winter sun, assailed by all the powers of darkness. He also suffered from the drought as imaged in the fire-breathing reptile, and in other ways as Lord of life in water, vegetation, and in various forms of food. This suffering deity or provider was the god in matter. Ra is the god in spirit, Osiris in matter, not only in the matter of earth, but also in the human form, the form assumed by Horus the child as the child of earth, or Set. Osiris, the great sufferer in the dead of winter, was not simply the sun, nor was Osiris dead, however inert in matter, lying dumb in darkness with non-beating hearts. He was the buried life of earth, and hence the god in matter, imaged in the likeness of a mummy awaiting for the resurrection in AMENTA. Such was the physical basis in the mythos of the mystery that is spiritual in eschatology. Mummy making in Egypt was far older than the Osirian cult. It was at least as old as Anup, A-N-U-P, the divine embalmer of the dead. Preserving the human mummy perfected intact was a mode of holding on to the individual form and features as a means of preserving the earthly likeness for identifying the personality hereafter in spirit. The mummy was made on purpose to preserve the physical likeness of the mortal. The risen, or I should say the rising dead, are spoken of in the ritual as, quote, those who have found their faces, end quote. The mummy was a primitive form of the African effigy, I should say, in which the body was preserved as its own portrait, whereas the ka was intended for his likeness of the spirit or immortal. The likeness in which the just spirit, made perfect, was to see Osiris in his glory. Both the mummy and the ka were represented in the Egyptian tomb, each with a chamber to itself. From the beginning, there has been a visible endeavor to preserve some likeness or memento of the earthly body, even when the bones alone could be preserved. Mummy making in the ritual begins with collecting the bones and piecing them together, if only in a likeness of the skeleton. It is at this stage that Horus is said to collect the bones of his father Osiris for the resurrection in a future life by means of transubstantiation. So these words that we're told, they're incorporated with a Catholic perspective here of transubstantiation. And again, like I said last night, Luther said the consubstantiation in his belief systems in the Lutheran Church. Remember, Luther was a former monk also of the Catholic Church. Most people would not know what this means. That what the whole thing of transubstantiation means is that it's all you're actually eating the flesh of the body of Christ and the blood of Christ. And Luther did not believe that that was that. He felt there was not a memorial as the Lord's Supper is done in most Protestant churches, but was a consubstantiation, which was more to do with the spirit of it, okay, not the reality of it. The same primitive mode of preparing the mummy is implied when it is said to the solar god on entering the underworld, quote, reckoning thou thy bones and set thy limbs and turn thy face to the beautiful AMENTA. It's based upon chapter 133, end quote. Teta, deceased, is thus addressed, quote, O Teta, thou hast raised up thy head for thy bones, and thou hast raised up thy bones for thy head, end quote. Also, the hand of Teta is said to be like a wall, a support of Horus in giving stability to his bones. Thus, the foundation was laid for building the mummy type as a present image of the person who had passed. Among us other types, the Eucanides made little stature of their fathers. I spelled Yucatanes, Eucanides. The head was left hollow so that the ashes of the cremated body might be placed in the skull as in the urn. This, says Landa, Landa, was then covered, quote, with the skin of the opposite taken from the corpse, end quote. The custom is akin to that which has been unearthed in European bone caves, where the skulls of the adult dead are found to have been Japan, and the bones of little children inserted instead of a human ashes. In sign language, the bones of the child were typical of rebirth in a future life. So they understood this, folks, even at that long ago. The desire to live and the longing for a life after death in earlier times are inexpressibly, and the efforts made to give some kind of expression to the feelings are ineffable, pathetic, based upon D. Acunal, relates that it was a custom with the South American Indians to preserve and keep the dead bodies of relatives in their homes as long as it was possible, so as to have their friends continually before their eyes. For these they made feasts and set out bed-ins before the dead bodies. Here in passing, we would suggest that in the Egyptian custom, as described by both Boethius and Plutarch, it was not the dead mummy that was brought to table as a type of immortality, but the image of the ka, which denoted what the guests would be like after death, and was thereafter a cause for rejoicing. Carrying the ka image round the festival board was just a Kamite prototype of the elevation and carrying round of the host for adoration in the Church of Rome. Indeed, the total paraphernalia of the Christian mysteries has been made use of the Egyptian temples. For instance, in one of the many titles of Osiris in all his forms and places, he is called, quote, Osiris in the monstrance. And it's based upon ritual, again in chapter 141. In the Roman ritual, the monstrance is a transparent vessel in which the host or victim is exhibited. In Egyptian cult, Osiris was the victim. Okay. The elevation of the host signified the resurrection of the crucified God, who rose again in spirit from the corpse of the victim, now represented by the host. Osiris in the monstrance should of itself suffice to show that the Egyptian Christ or Christ is the original Christ, and the Egyptian mysteries were continued by the Gnosis and Christianized in Rome. So, what he's saying here simply is that the Gnosis, that is the Gnosis writings of the non-Hamani scriptures, and the Christianized in Rome, which I've talked about simply is that what we have today, the Christianity was molded and made in Rome. The mode of conveying the oral wisdom to the initiate in the mysteries of young man making was continued in the mysteries of mummy making. While the mummy was being prepared for burial, chapters of the ritual were read to it, or the conscious ka by a official who was known as the man of the roll. Every Egyptian was supposed to be acquainted with the formula from having learned them during his lifetime, by which he was to have the use of his limbs and possession of his soul restored to him in death, and to be protected from the dangers of the netherworld. These were repeated to the dead person, however, for greater security during the process of embalming, and the son of deceased, or the master of the ceremonies took care to whisper to the mummy most mysterious parts, which no living ear might hear, with impunity. And this is from the works by Maspero, Maspero, The Struggle of the Nations, English translation, page 510 and 511. And with that, I'm going to cease the broadcast this evening. And we'll get to this another time. Getting a little tired and need to get something to eat here. So I appreciate you being here. Thank you for listening. Again, this is from the second part, as I call it. There will be a part 3 also. Again, this is from Gerald Massey, the Egyptian book of the Dead and the Mysteries of AMENTA. And so, let me get something to drink here real quick. So Gerald Massey was a theosophist. That's the word I always tend to have a like or forget sharing that with you. So I'm going to take a break. I don't know if I'll do another broadcast tonight, but I wanted to share this information because I simply wanted to share this work by Gerald Massey. 2 people I recommend if you want to look into this theosophical writings would be Gerald Massey and Alvin Boyd Kuhn. Gerald Massey is from England. Like I said, I told you pretty much what his story was about. Being a very poor person, poor family, rose and became very active in the museum, doing what we call Egyptian hieroglyphics. Alvin Boyd Kuhn is basically kind of a disciple of him, meaning he came in later on. I think he passed away in 1960. And is also a theosophist. Most people don't know who these guys are. And it's really sad because I think it's very important these works be revealed. Because most of what we have is Madame Blavatsky gets all the attention. And I don't know necessarily I agree with that. I believe just simply is that these were people who were obviously esoteric in a lot of ways and were gifted immensely. And Alvin Boyd Kuhn wrote many books, and they're available. You can find them. You can find them on Amazon. They're available. These works are available. Probably 25 or 30 years ago, they probably were not available unless you went to a used bookstore and knew what you're looking for, which most people would not have been. So the opportunity is there to read these books, to sharpen your approach to why you're here or what your purpose is. So thank you. Today again is the 18th day of April 2024. I wish you a good night. Take care.